Never in a million years could I have imagined producing and hosting a podcast for the maritime industry. And now I have done it for 5 years. This is the 5-year anniversary episode. And thank you to everyone who's listening. I reach people in more than 165 countries. And the Shipping Podcast is downloaded more than 6,000 times a month. I think that is worth celebrating. Don't you? Welcome to the Shipping Podcast, where I meet interesting maritime professionals sharing their passion for the shipping industry and their everyday job. I am your host. My name is Lena Gothberg. Hello, Shipping Podcast lovers, and welcome to the 142nd episode of the Shipping Podcast and the 5 years anniversary of this podcast. It was on July 31st, 2015 that I released the first episode with Captain Nils Peterson. It feels like a lifetime ago, but also as it was only yesterday that I started. When I set out with this Shipping Podcast, I was a forerunner. No one else had spotted the void for maritime voices in the mainstream media, and especially not in the podosphere. Nowadays, I've got several podcast colleagues focusing on the maritime world, and that makes me really happy. In my opinion, the toughest competitors are hosted by females, and that makes me even more happy. As you know, I'm an advocate for women in the maritime space. I have interviewed almost 150 people from the maritime industry. They have been speaking about things close to their heart, but they have also been asked by me about things close to my heart. And I think that the visibility question is the most important one. Lately, it has become so apparent that we as an industry has a long way to go before we can say that we have a profile in the general public and among decision makers. If we had started this work earlier, the seafarers that still are stuck on their ships and unable to travel home would not be where they are now. During the last 5 years, I have asked so many people how the maritime industry can become more visible. And since more people now finally has become aware of the fact that it's our responsibility to change the fact that so few know so little about us, I decided to go back and listen to some of my guests and share with you what they replied when I asked them, how can we become more visible? Since Jonathan Wichmann, at that time the hottest communication wizard in the maritime industry, was one of my first guests on the Shipping Podcast, I wanted to hear what he had to say when I asked him how everything that he knows about communication can be applied on the entire industry. How does the entire shipping industry become more visible?
Yeah.
Because nowadays you don't see ships coming into ports or the ports is outside the cities. And when I was a small child, some of my mates, friends wanted to become the captain of the sea or whatever. And nowadays no one knows what is that. Small children, do they want to become? You have 3 children. Does any one of those want to become a master mariner?
No. I think it's. I think you can, of course, do campaigns and all sorts of things, but really you cannot, escape the bigger picture, which is that it's becoming more and more, automated. I think.
But it's
of course,
also...
there's still people in there.
Yeah.
And I think so. While that is happening, you will always need people. There's stories to tell. So I think, but you're competing against football clubs and that's what they want to.
And whatever.
All sorts of computer games, which is instant gratification in a way. But I think I don't think it's going. It's not one-sided. So it's just moving towards that. There's also sort of these counter attacks of people who want to slow down and they want to look beyond, and so I don't think it's like museums and libraries are going away and people will start reading and everything will be sci-fi. That would be very naive to think. And I also think that there's a room for shipping. But I think it would be very wise to make sure it's not foreign territory for people, that they understand what it is, what this kind of job, if you're a seafarer, for instance, what that entails, because it is quite different from anything else you'll experience. I'm not a seafarer, but I can tell, the thing about being away for a long period of time. In some companies, it's sort of long stretches with no land in sight. That's quite unique. It's. I think there's room for that, definitely. I don't think we need to be world famous, but I think the smart players, I think it's a competitive advantage. If not today, then very simply a necessity to understand. How do we use digital technologies? Because you want to employ the right people. You want to ensure that you are not disrupted by the concept of, for just one example, of shared container space, so startups going in and utilizing all the empties in a better way, or crowd shipping even.
Jonathan is a master of storytelling, and in episode 2, he shared the story about how he set up all social media channels for Maersk when he was head of social media there a long time ago. The important bit of what Jonathan is saying is that building a brand takes longer than just a campaign. It's an endless, tiresome, and sometimes tedious job, which has to be done. There has to be a strategic plan behind it, and that is the important thing that many people forget about. People think that communication is something very easy and that it could be done by everyone. I promise you that is not the case. In 2016, I met with D Adamson, a blue futurist at Future Nautics, and that changed my approach with the shipping podcast. It was then that I realized that what I wanted to know more about was innovation and the way things could be in the maritime industry, not what it is like today. When asked which episode to start with as a new listener of this podcast, I always say episode 35 with D Adamson. Before we listen to the clip with Kate, keep in mind that 4 years ago, many things looked quite different. Satellite communication was much more expensive, and social media was not as mainstream as it is today. There were not a lot of ships that offered their crew access to Facebook, for instance. It was a very awkward question when I put that to ship owners. Things have changed since then, but still, Kate has a view on how we can raise the profile of the maritime industry. It all boils down to transparency, according to her. Listen to this. How do we get shipping more visible?
Yeah, I wrote about this last year, and there seems to be this attitude that what shipping needs is better PR and better marketing. And as I said on the stage in Manila, shipping doesn't need that. Shipping doesn't need better PR, it just needs to get better. Because what drives interest and what drives engagement is transparency. Shipping doesn't do transparency. It plays its cards close to its chest. Transparency is actually what we need. And you're not going to drive that via PR, because what PR really does is try and take a story and a line and spin it out to everybody. And traditional PR is based on, well, as long as we can get these influential people to write about us, then we'll be okay. So you find an awful lot of people in Maritime who think that as long as you can get a really nice article in Lloyd's List, then you've done really well. Well, actually, the truth of it is that the news stream is now every single person with a mobile phone, every single person with an internet connection, a camera, that is where news is coming from. And this scares ship operators rigid. The idea that their crew and anybody can be uploading anything and telling stories. But the truth of it is that you cannot fight this. What you have to do is take advantage of it. I'm not saying that social media is a wonderful panacea, because it's not. Social media is just people, and you get good people and you get bad people. But actually, the transparency that it can deliver is what the generation that we need to engage want. And if we honestly feel that we have got an industry that is worth shouting about, then we can't be scared of the transparency that social media will bring. And if it does point out things that are wrong, we need to put them right, which is why I say we don't need better PR. We don't need better marketing. We need to get better, because if we know we've got issues with our emissions or with the way some crew are treated or, with all sorts of things, we need to work as an industry to make them better. And there's no point in getting a highly paid PR agency to try and, make shipping more visible. Shipping becomes transparent. Shipping will become more visible.
It means that they should do it the other way around. They should tell everyone that could be on social media to talk about the shipping industry in social media, instead of saying you're not allowed.
Exactly.
In August 2016, episode 39 was released. I met Anna Larsson, at that time head of the Trident Alliance, but today head of corporate communications at Wallenius Wilhelmsen. And she spoke about how the environmental discussions has made politicians more aware of the maritime industry. And she also gave some great ideas on how to actually showcase the industry. We're usually looked upon as the hidden industry, or the secret of the world in a way.
Quite. Yeah.
How do we change that?
Well, I think that kind of changed a little bit during COP, because it became more of a question that was actually discussed in news media, in general news media. Unfortunately, that means that shipping is then known more for either vessel accidents, incidents, or environmental
bad guys.
And I think to change it, what we need to do is really to make sure that we can show what we're doing and how it contributes to people's everyday lives. And I think it's mostly important for when it comes to recruiting and reaching out to schools and to young people. I don't know if it's necessarily so that every man, woman, and child in the world needs to know everything about how their products get to them. But I think especially when it comes to students, then it's really important.
I think that we need more attention to our industry, because the more attention we get to show up the good sides, the green sides, the cool industry, and so on, that will help to build a reputation.
Yeah, as you say, it is a cool industry, and the vessels are so cool. But they're at sea, and they're usually far out. They're supposed to spend most of their time far away from land, and people don't see them. And I think one thing that shipping companies could do to really sort of increase interest and understanding is to actually organize more open days. Invite families, invite communities to go on board vessels when they're at port and actually show what they're doing and how it works. I think that would be more of that, I think would have a good contribution.
During the spring of 2017, I had the pleasure of meeting Anne Steffensen, General Manager and CEO of the Danish Ship Owners Association. And they are working with branding. They use storytelling. Haven't I heard that before from a Danish communications wizard that we just listened to? Anyway, Anne is one of the few with some tangible advice on how to make the maritime industry more visible. Here are her advice. You find them in episode 60. So what is your best advice then? How could shipping in general be more visible? Because we are often looked upon as the Cinderella industry. No one knows about us.
No, that's true. And I think that's one of the challenges of the shipping industry. In this association, we have worked very much with what I would call storytelling about what we do. And I think it's all about storytelling, making sure that people not only understand, but has an image or a picture of what we're doing in this industry. And we have sort of 3 taglines, if you like, in our storytelling. First of all, we have a story about how we create value to the wider society, not only to ourselves as ship owners, but how we create value in terms of creating jobs, but also, being facilitator of global trade, making sure that also people in less rich countries of the world have access to services that can get their products into the world market, that sort of thing. So creating value is one part of it and showing it. Secondly, it's also making sure that you tell the story about us being a global industry, not just being local in a Danish context. We are, of course, also local, but being global in terms of working across borders and across the world, in all continents. And last but not least, it's of course also making sure that people know and that we are visible about being an industry that takes responsibility, that we are at the forefront on all the topics which are also top of mind in the general public, among politicians, but also among young people. For example, climate change, recycling of ships, other environmental issues, which is, I think, much more at the forefront of the mind of young people than we sometimes think. So creating value, being global, taking responsibility as an industry is how we can show what we are here for.
Taglines: creating value, we are a global industry, and taking responsibility. I think we should make a note of them. And if you find time to listen to Anne, there are so many tidbits in that episode. Go back on your app to episode 60 or go to the website shippingpodcast.com and use the search function and search for Anne. Last summer, 2019, I tracked down a Swede who works for the cruise industry and is very much aware of the importance of branding. Namely, Patrik Dahlgren, Senior Vice President, Global Marine Operations at Royal Caribbean Cruises, and the manager of the world's most famous captain, Captain Kate McHugh, who I also interviewed in episode 114. And that is the far most downloaded episode of the Shipping Podcast. Patrik was on holiday in Stockholm when this ambitious podcast producer suggested a podcast interview. I don't know if he knew what hit him, but luckily we have a friend in common who explained to Patrik that I am one of the good guys, which probably helped me to have a chat with him. So maybe I shouldn't put this question to you because you already are doing your best, but how could the shipping industry, become more visible to the general public?
I think we are way too old-fashioned. I think what we did with particularly Captain Kate, but also overall with social media, have helped us a lot. But I think we can do way more. We can use social media way more. We can use modern ways like podcasts and making sure that people like yourself, Lena, is more spread across the world, more of you across the world that speaks the language that we all speak and talk about the industry. It's such an amazing industry, and it's an industry I have passion for, whether it is cruise or whether it is shipping in general. But there is so much we can do, and such a crucial part of the world. The world trade will stop without shipping. So we are here to stay, but our voice needs to be heard, and it needs to be heard in terms of innovation. It's mostly our own fault. I would say almost solely our own fault. Shipping companies are very stale. They work in silos. Most shipping companies work in silos individually themselves. Even the best company seems to work in silos. They don't talk to each other between departments. They don't really innovate to elevate in a collaborative way. We need to work better together. We have IMO, which is a wonderful organization. And I think there we also have an opportunity to really elevate that. I was recently, and one of the larger reasons I'm here in Europe now is for Global Industry Alliance, which is an IMO portion, which I was invited to be one of the advisors to. And it's a really great organization, and we have some really great opportunity moving forward, both on gender and sustainability.
I dare to say Patrik knows what he's talking about. Of course, the cruise industry is suffering maybe worse than any other part of the shipping industry right now. But I am convinced that they will bounce back. If you're not following Captain Kate on Instagram, please do. Watch her keeping the morale up for the crew stuck on the cruise ships. How they use their ships for repatriation. That means that they sail to the home countries of the crew with the ships to transport people back home, since they are not allowed to travel by any other transport mode. And if you don't believe what you read in the papers, or if you think it's not enough written in the papers about the unsung heroes, the seafarers, go and listen to episode 140 with Leslie Warwick, speaking about the work done by the Seafarers House in Port Everglades, and share that with as many people as possible. I think it's time that we listen to the young voice of the maritime industry. Giovanni Colotto wrote to me and almost demanded to be a guest on the Shipping Podcast. And I am happy that he was so persistent. Listen to this. How do we become more visible to the general public? What do you think?
Yeah, that is a good point. And that is the reason why I actually got in touch with you in the first place, because this type of initiative are very powerful to me. When you have a big community of people that are sharing their voice and they're sharing their opinions and they are sharing all the details of an industry that is very complex, but is also working a little bit under the carpet from a visibility perspective, is a perfect start to change, or more than to change, to raise awareness of consumers. Because what you see, and all of us will probably have experienced this, when you talk to friends, relatives, or whatsoever, they really know little about shipping and the complexity of it. You know, it's like everybody of us probably heard in the past, you move from A to B stuff. Well, yeah, that is correct, but it's not exactly like that. I mean, it's like you go in an hotel and you see everything is clean, but you don't know what is on the back of it, right? So how much work, organization, and regulations and politics there are behind it. So this is a bit the point, you know. Community and awareness is very important. And the more people knows, the more people will give value, because you cannot give value to something that you actually don't know. Another example, a little bit on a different dimension, but I think it gives the flavor of what we are saying here. During the pandemic, we have tons of seafarers, a lot of people, thousands of them, they could not join back their home. There was no way. And our community that is huge, because it is huge, it was not actually able to coordinate one single, voice at the political level. It came at the very last part, a little bit with IMO, with local authorities and whatever, but it came with a lag of 2-3 months. I find it very difficult. And I know, because I spoke also with other CEOs, even of definitely bigger companies, than with a footprint that is bigger than mine. But and it's difficult. There was, because if you have to coordinate and to put together a voice when the pandemic already took place, it's too late, because you will not have the speed to act. And that is a good example, I think.
Yeah, and I also think that if they realize that during the pandemic that there is no common voice to influence people who take decisions on our behalf, then they should do something about that also when we go back to the new reality which we are going to face sooner or later here. I mean, because there's so many things we need for people to understand when they are deciding things. I mean, we've got all the discussions about the green industry, becoming green. If they don't understand what we do, how can they support us with the right decisions? In all fairness, I now know that the leaders of the maritime industry during the pandemic crisis has come to realize the strength of speaking with one voice and how strong we are together when we really put our minds to problem solving. I have heard many of them, the leaders of the maritime industry, say that this needs to continue also when we move forward. And that is music to my ears. I have now given them and you some input on how to do this, which I hope they will listen to, but I can't be sure. It's easy to ask any communications person to put together a campaign. But I think we need to listen to the people who have done this in a great way. We need to build our brand, and that takes more. It takes a strategy. It takes a business plan. And it takes so much longer than you think. If you need me, if you want me, I'm here for you. And last but not least, I would like to take this opportunity to say thank you to my audience. A big virtual hug to you. Without you, I'm nothing. But I'm happy to be in your ears and maybe have some influence over your hearts. Thank you for your loyalty over the years. And I hope that you will write to me and give me some feedback also on this episode. So, until the next time, from me to you, over and out. Thank you for listening to the Shipping Podcast. Don't forget to tell everyone that you meet that there is a shipping podcast available and that they should download it and listen to the maritime professionals who are sharing their passion for the shipping industry.